just wanted to do a quick follow-up after the last video. I got some really interesting comments from Engineer X. And the total thrust numbers that I was comparing previously aren't actually the best way to really see what's going on, because as we increase the number of blades, we increase the load, which means that we'll be spinning at a lower RPM. So some of the thrust loss that we would see from increasing the number of blades is actually due to the motor spinning slower and really isn't the fault of any aerodynamic issues with the blades interfering with each other or what have you. So I went back and did some other comparisons, and I also just shortly after had found that Xsol has a 3-bladed version of the prop available now, so I picked that up so we could have another that great middle data point between the 2 blades and the 4 blades to see if any estimates that we might make are going to hold up from our test results. So we've got that to look at. He also mentioned that in his reading that the largest contributor to the increase in load doesn't come from the props interacting with each other, but rather from the increase in drag and tip vortices from having more prop tips overall. Although I think that the effect will be consistent per blade, because every single blade has a single tip. So while the load may increase because of inefficiencies from just having more blades overall, we would expect that those inefficiencies, the increase in load, would stay the same as we increase blades, just as if you had two-bladed props running separately, they'll each give you the same lift per blade as a single 2-bladed prop running on its own. I'm also really curious just how much of an effect we actually see from the blade advancing into clean air in forward flight. I feel like a lot of the information that is going to be out there is going to be for props with lower RPM, even though they may be larger and have significantly higher tip linear speed. The speed that they actually, each blade will pass over the same kind of spot of air is going to be a lot faster on our little kind of 3-inch motor test here. We are looking at on these 3-inch props between 30 and 40,000 RPM, and at 60 miles an hour, which is a good clip for a quad to go, that would put one full blade rotation in just 2 inches of forward travel. And if you've got a 4-blade prop, that means each blade is passing over the same air that the previous blade was every half an inch. Any of those effects should be magnified much more on the static thrust stand, because I'm not pushing it through a moving column of air. But the core of what I wanted to get into is in this chart that we're looking at here. I went back to the data, logged the tri-bladed prop. What I have arranged here is grams per blade per RPM. So the motor is not a factor. We're not looking at the test over time, but we're seeing the amount of thrust that every individual blade in the prop is producing at a certain RPM. I can be reasonably sure that I'm looking at actually good data and not just noise or measurement error. If I say plot the 2-bladed prop at 4S, we can see that it's on higher battery voltage, but it's the same prop spinning the same speed, and it's giving us the same thrust per blade. And you can kind of get a sense there for what range of measurement error we might be seeing, and obviously that goes all the way up to a much higher RPM than any of the other tests. So definitely the differences that we are seeing between these 3 props is well larger than just kind of the general noise of the system. So we can make some good conclusions here. The top one, of course, is the 2-bladed prop. The middle is the 3 and the bottom is the 4. And there's another kind of interesting symmetry I found in this. We're losing about 15% thrust per blade by going from 2 to 3. And then from 2 to 4, we lose an additional roughly 10%. So the 4-bladed prop is making 25% less thrust per blade than the 2-bladed prop is. So that's not just increased load from the motor, because we're looking at the specific motor or the specific prop RPM, and it's not just the normal drag. This is comparing like to like, same blade shape in the same situation, giving us slightly less thrust as we add more of them. And if we look just from 3 to 4, that's about 15%. So it feels like every single blade we add, we're losing 15% of the thrust per blade. So we can kind of make some interesting guesses, some dead reckoning about what it might mean to go to a higher bladed prop. You can also see at the top of the list the RPM loss. So as we go from 2 blades to 3 blades, we lose about 2,000 RPM, and actually each of these steps is about a 2,000 RPM loss. So this is the additional load from the extra blade, and that's fairly consistent enough. Again, we can kind of to just do some plain dead reckoning. So we could say, what would this prop, like this same blade, not changing the blade form at all, what if we made this a 6-bladed prop? How much thrust, not saying efficiency, this doesn't show efficiency at all. This is just the amount of total thrust that we could expect from this prop on this motor. So if you do just the simple math of taking the 2-bladed prop and going to single prop thrust numbers, which we're looking at about 107 grams per blade, and multiply it by 0.85 to get rid of that 15%, 5 times to get down to 6-bladed prop, that puts us at around 55 grams per blade, which is about here. So that's a total thrust of about 330 grams, which is actually pretty good. We were looking at, this is the 2, so we've only got about 214 grams on the 2. The quad blade is like 260, so it's like maybe another 60 grams of thrust. But we have to remember we're losing RPM, and this is the big one that I missed in my last video. So we're at 55, but we're losing 2,000 RPM per blade. So we need to go from the 3-blade or from the 4-blade and estimate we're going to be down here at the 5-blade and a 6-blade. If we lose another, then we're looking at kind of estimating, where your 55 is, following roughly this curve. And, you can kind of put that around, say, maybe here. That kind of follows where those two lines intersect at around about 43 grams per blade. And once we bring that back up to the full 6, now all of a sudden we're only looking at about 258 grams total for the entire prop, which is actually the same as the 3-bladed prop, just because of the loss of RPM that we would anticipate that we have from increasing the load. So that brings up the question of efficiencies. We have this kind of curve here where as we increase the number of props, the load and the thrust per blade goes down, so we're going to hit this point where we start dropping off and producing less thrust than the previous one. On the 2-blade and the 3-bladed versions, they tested out at the same efficiency. So the 3-blade seems kind of like a good sweet spot. In those terms, we're gaining thrust and it's not significantly less efficient to do so. The numbers were about 2.35 grams per watt for both the 2 and the 3. The 4-bladed prop, we lost a little bit of efficiency that we saw in the previous video. That was down to about a 2.27. So we're starting to see a little bit of a reduction in efficiency as we go to the 4, and I would anticipate that we would see more of a loss of efficiency as we go to 5 and 6. And so we could guess that we've got a thrust value that we're estimating is about the same as the 3, but since we're also starting to lose efficiency as we go down, we're going to lose more efficiency, and that's what gets us to kind of what you would typically think of. The 6-bladed prop is going to be a heavy load that just uses a lot of battery power and doesn't necessarily give us more thrust for it. So obviously that's all theory craft and number crunching. You know, we would really want to put that to the test, but I think that once we plugged in this 3-bladed prop, it really does seem to fit very cleanly in with the between all 3. It's a fairly clean looking comparison that I was really surprised to see just how well all of that lines up. I'm not exactly sure where that if the thrust lost is coming from. I kind of wonder if it might be related to like, I know coaxial mounted like octocopters and stuff. I've read they often will put a higher pitch prop on the bottom motor because it's in like an even more moving column of air from the prop above, just to give it a better bite. So I wonder if maybe we're seeing something like that, if we are getting some disturbance that the trailing blade is coming into, that doesn't necessarily increase the load. It's not like all pure drag, but if the air is moving about, so that's kind of decreasing the load just a little bit on that prop as we add it, so it's not getting as strong a bite on the air as it did when it had more time for the air column to settle, as you do with when you have fewer blades. So there you go. I found that was really great to see, to get that 3rd prop in there and have this other data point, and some great points brought up by Engineer X. So there's a much better look at what the data actually says, just from in terms of efficiency, not necessarily looking at the prop as a whole.